So, of course, Neil's touched on this, the difference between clinical trials, randomised clinical trials, which is the top quality evidence, and the real-world model. And they really answer quite different things because they're designed differently. The real randomised clinical trials, of course, give us the highest quality answer, but they're really limited in that they're very selected patients. They have to attend, which cuts out quite a lot of people in your clinic. They're designed for very specific questions. They can't always answer questions that you might face your clinic patient. They just answer the question provided. The real-world outcomes, on the other hand, just take your unselected, wide-ranging people, the sort of people that you might need in the clinic, and that you can include all sorts of other outcomes, including patient-related outcomes, and you can also get outcomes for a much longer period than is feasible and possible in randomised clinical trials, which, of course, are very expensive to run. So, in fact, the two sort of complement each other when you're facing your patient. The randomised clinical trials really prove that the treatment is going to work, and on the basis of that, they become available by our funding and licensing authorities. And of course, then, those same authorities want to know, well, what happens when I release this drug out into the clinical setting? Is it going to be effective? It's also very important, the real-world evidence, to help your patient know, well, what's going to happen to me? You know, how long am I going to need this for? What's going to happen? And really, and the health providers want to know, is it worth their while? Are they making a difference? So it really can give complementary evidence and provide and fill in some of the gaps. Now, the first thing that real-world evidence showed us was the point that's been hammered home in the presentations to date, that the biggest impact on outcome is on treatment frequency. And this is one of the first real-world outcomes that came from Europe really early on, if we think that the drug was only really becoming available in 2006. And the important thing, this is an AURA study from just people treating in Europe. We can see they've got over 2,000 people in, so already we're talking about a large study, but the mean injections over 2 years was 7.2, and what do we get for that? In the black line in the middle, well, we only got 2.4 letters gained. But the important thing that you can see in those coloured lines, which is gradated by country, the countries that did the most injections down to the countries that did the least, you got an absolutely linear change. If you've got more injections in, you're going to do better than if you got least. So this is very important in terms of distribution of resources. If you're going to treat, you really need to treat enough. This is a meta-analysis done by Kim and through Mark Gillies at one of our Sydney centre here, where early on too, this paper is out in 2016, so they're looking at studies up to 2015. They're really the early years of experience. And they did a meta-analysis to try and improve the quality of this real-world outcomes. And they looked at 42 observational studies, themselves quite poor quality because they're just observational, but really a large number of patients, 26,000, and tried to see how they did at 1, 2, and 3 years. Now, overall here, you see they're not sort of too bad. 5 letters, this is in the real world, 1 year, 3.4 at 2, 1.1 at 3, with a mean injection of 5.4 each year. But again, you see in those figures, the countries that had a higher rate of injections, particularly in Australia where we do treat and extend and have a lucky logistics system where we have access to the drug, got much better outcomes. And they compared specifically the approach, treatment regimen, PRN, less injections, got really quite poor results compared to treat and extend where the injection frequency was high, which we can see here. So I'm just now going to touch on some more real-world evidence to help guide us. The first from the UK, retrospective case reports. They've really done a lot of this from their medical records. Work that we've done a lot here in Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, now extending around the world on prospective audit, and experience with aflibercept from Perseus in Germany. So from the UK, their first data that came out, again very early on, a really large number of patients and eyes we see here, but they were really being undertreated. By 1 year, they had 2 letters up, But this was dropped away by 3 years, only -2 letters gained. So they weren't really achieving it, and the authors state that it was really suboptimal outcomes is really due to under-treatment. You see here the mean number of injections down to under 4 a year. Similarly, I've just lost my microphone there. Maybe you can put this one on. Thank you. Similarly, they made comment on this is on a group of people, again in the UK, that were just using aflibercept, and they started out in the first year on a fixed regimen and gained, 5 letters in the real world, but they really lost it in the second year when they moved off into a less intense treatment, again only 3.7 injections, saying that you really need to maintain this. This too is a direct comparison that they did between proactive regimens or reactive, the PRN. And again, there's a difference in drugs here. This is a case record from the UK. You can see that they really had quite a lot of eyes here, and they were matched with age, vision at entry, and the year they started treatment. And you can see again, the people who got regular treatment with aflibercept did better than the people who got a reactive approach with ranibizumab, and again, a difference in the injection numbers. Now, what about insights from the FRB, Fight Retinal Blindness Program, which is prospective? Here we do have some long-term outcomes. This paper was put out quite some time ago, but in 2015, at which time the treatment had been around for 8 years, but about 1,200 eyes who had follow-up, and the mean is just under 5 years, 4.5 years. And really, we see that the vision can be maintained. If you look at the blue line, these are the people who continued right out to 7 years, and they really only cross over their baseline, this group, at 6 years, which is much better than previously noted. But look how many injections. They were getting a mean of 5 every year. But if you do that, even out at 7 years, these people, 40% have driving vision, better than 6/12, and very few are legally blind. We did a specific study on treat and extend, and again, this is early in the treatment course, and we see here that the average number of treatments required and visits was very similar to the number that Neil mentioned was required in the PRN, about 13 to 14 a year. And if we look at the groups enrolled, they were enrolled 2006 to 12. In the last few years of enrolment, we're really gaining, with a treat and extend at 2 years, up in the level of the clinical evidence at 2 years. But what information can we get about the various phases of treatment? Here we see work that we've done on nearly 1,300 eyes. How quickly did they become inactive in the induction phase where you treat to inactivity? Well, first, about 15% didn't become inactive. They remained with fluid. But the people who did, and that was the majority, most of them became inactive in the first year, over 60% with 1 to 3 injections. And in fact, 1 to 10 only needed 1 injection to become inactive. This is very useful data that you can tell your patients. But importantly, 1 in 20 needed it for 12 months of continuous treatment. And that injection frequency early was the biggest predictor of how well you were going to do in becoming inactive. So really, you need to treat these people intensively. This is important data for the patient and convincing for them. Similar results were seen in a subgroup of people who received treat and extend only with aflibercept. What about in the maintenance phase? This is over 2,000 eyes. Once they became inactive and they were therefore treated on continuously, how frequently did they need their treatments? Well, if we look at the treatment interval here at the top, we can see that about 1 in 5 were still needing it at 4 weeks to keep them inactive and keep them under treatment once they'd hit inactivity for the first time. But here, 12 weeks and above is about 25%. 1 in 4 people only really need it that frequently. The reactivation rate in these groups, how many of the people, once we got them active, then became inactive, how many became active again? Over a third, 38%, never had any reactivation, and that was in quite a long follow-up. So this is out into their 3rd and 4th year. What about the risk of reactivation? Well, it did increase if you got beyond 12 weeks. 1 in 5 at 16 weeks, 4 months, but really 1 in 3 reactivated if you extended out to 20 weeks. So this is important information to tell the people in the risk if they say, can I stop this treatment now? What about some data that we have now from Germany, which is a prospective real-world data called the Perseus study, which has recently been published in Retina. Now, they took eyes that were going to be treated in the clinic with aflibercept, and they had over 800 eyes. It took both treatment-naive and previously treated eyes, about 55% treatment-naive, and they looked at 12-month outcomes in about 73% who got there. And they divided the outcomes to look at a group that received their treatment as planned, which was a full induction at 3 and then bi-monthly for the whole year. There were about a third of the people had that, and the others had somewhat less. They missed visits, they didn't get their treatment, whatever it was. And they found that the people who missed their visits, got irregular treatment, just didn't get the same benefit as the group who did. You can see here the difference in letters, and the difference is attributed to the difference in their mean injections. So in other words, a proactive full treatment, particularly in the 12 months, is important. And this was applied whether or not they were treatment naive or whether they were previously treated. The solid lines here are the treatment naive group, and the dotteds are the previously treated. And we see for both groups, it was of benefit to receive the full complement of treatment, at least in the first year. So although there's some gaps, I think real-world evidence can add information that helps you manage a patient, that in the real world, unselected patients who go on holidays, don't turn up, or there are many reasons why they don't fulfill the full criteria, you can get rapid and sustained vision improvements. But that injection frequency is really the very important factor in attaining good vision outcomes, both at the beginning and in the maintenance. And really what we expect, or for most patients, the average will be 7 or 8 in the first year, 5 to 6 each year ongoing. And that's very similar if we extrapolate out to what we heard before in the first 2 years of treatment, for which we do have randomized clinical trials. It appears, at least in the real world, that proactive regimens, including fixed dose and treat and extend, generally achieve a better visual outcome than PRN.